Alright, I reckon it's time we did some history. No, I'm not gone nah. Be able to fit the entire history of Australia into a single response, because that would be pretty damn near impossible. So instead, what I'm gone nah do is give you a history of Australia in a single response in broad strokes, covering all of the major beats and events that have shaped this country from the earliest times right up until today. And if you want to hear more about any particular period or event, just let me know and I'll tell you. Anyway, grab yourself a snag and a coldie and settle in, because here's the history of Australia. Let's start this story back when you're average. European thought that the only thing that existed outside of Europe was a big, dark, scary desert called Africa and a giant water feature which covered half the known world and was home to terrifying beasts called Indians. As far as the average European was concerned, there was bugger all out here. But what they didn't know was that there was already a massive population of humans living out here in the vast wilderness of the Australian continent. These people had been living in Australia for more than 65,000 years and had built a vibrant and varied civilization across the continent. These people weren't a single civilization, though. They were actually made up of hundreds of different groups who spoke different languages and had different customs. For convenience sake, we refer to these people as Aboriginal Australians. Anyway, Aboriginal Australians lived in a variety of different environments, from tropical rainforests in the northeast to arid deserts in the center of the continent. Because of this, they developed different ways of life suited to those environments. The one thing that tied all of these different peoples together was their deep connection to the land. Aboriginal Australians, the land wasn't just a resource to be exploited, it was their mother. They believed that they were born from the land and that they were responsible for caring for it. It was this connection that allowed them to thrive on the land for so many thousands of years. They developed sophisticated systems of land management, which included things like controlled burning, which helped to promote biodiversity and ensure the land remained healthy and productive. This is why when Europeans arrived, they couldn't understand why Aboriginal people would set fires in order to burn off the land, but that's another story. Aboriginal Australians also had a rich culture. They told stories around campfires, sang songs, and created incredible works of art. They had deep spiritual beliefs and complex social structures. Some groups were organized into clans, while others were more egalitarian. But no matter how they were organized, they all had a deep respect for each other and for the land. This was a way of life that had been honed over tens of thousands of years, and it was a way of life that was perfectly suited to the Australian environment. Then the Europeans turned up and everything changed. You see, for thousands of years, Aboriginal Australians had lived in relative peace. Their biggest problems were probably figuring out where to find the best food sources and defending themselves against dangerous animals. Then one day, everything changed. One day in 1606, an explorer named Willem Janszoon landed in what is now Western Australia. He didn't stay long, but he proved that Australia was not the terra nullius Europeans believed it to be. In fact, it was inhabited by thousands of people. Unfortunately for Aboriginal Australians, this wouldn't be the last time that Europeans would set foot on their land. Over the next few decades, explorers like Abel Tasman and James Cook would map the Australian coast and claim it for the Dutch and the British respectively. And in 1788, the British would establish a penal colony in Botany Bay, marking the beginning of permanent European settlement in Australia. This isn't a history lesson, though, so I'm not going to spend too much time on this. Just know that from this point onwards, it's pretty much all downhill for Aboriginal Australians. The British would go on to conquer most of the continent and dispossess the Aboriginal people of their land, causing immeasurable damage in the process. But anyway, fast forward a couple of hundred years, and Australia had become a reasonably prosperous colony. Its population had grown significantly, and it was on the cusp of something big. In 1851, gold was discovered in Australia, which sparked a series of events that would change the country forever. The first gold rush happened in New South Wales, but soon after, even more gold was found in neighbouring Victoria. This led to a massive spike in population in the region, as well as the development of new technologies and industries. The influx of new people also led to increased demand for goods and services, which in turn led to the growth of cities like Melbourne. But the gold rushes weren't just about economics. They also had a profound social impact. They led to the Eureka Rebellion of 1854, which was a major turning point in the fight for democracy in Australia. The rebellion, which was led by miners, was sparked by the introduction of unfair regulations and licensing fees on gold diggers by the colonial government. Though the rebellion was eventually put down, it left a lasting legacy. It demonstrated the power of the working class and helped to pave the way for the introduction of universal male suffrage in the 1860s. This was the turning point for Australia. It was at this point that Australia really started to take shape as a distinct and independent entity. The gold rushes had transformed the economy and society, and the fight for democracy had laid the foundation for a new era of political participation. The stage was set for Australia to become a modern and progressive nation. But then the country had to go through 2 world wars to get there. Anyway, in 1901, the 6 Australian colonies federated to form the Commonwealth of Australia. This was a major milestone for the young nation, created a single unified country, and laid the foundations for a new system of government. However, it's worth noting that despite this progress, the new constitution still excluded Indigenous Australians from citizenship and voting rights. This exclusion was a sad reflection of the attitudes of the time, and it would be a long time before these wrongs were righted. Anyway, following federation, Australia faced a number of challenges, including economic difficulties and the need to build national infrastructure. But it also had the opportunity to play a major role on the world stage. In 1914, when World War I broke out, Australia found itself caught up in a conflict that would change the world forever. Despite being a relatively small and inexperienced nation, Australia played a significant role in the war. Perhaps the most famous example of this was the Gallipoli Campaign of 1915, in which Australian and New Zealand troops, known as Anzacs, fought against the Ottoman Empire. Although the campaign was ultimately unsuccessful, the Anzacs' bravery and sacrifice became a defining moment in Australian history. This experience also helped to forge a new sense of national identity and pride among Australians. When World War II broke out, Australia found itself once again on the front lines. This time the threat was even closer to home, with the Japanese army advancing through the Pacific. The war in the Pacific brought the conflict to Australia's doorstep with bombing raids on Darwin in 1942. Australians rallied together to defend their country, with women taking on traditionally male roles in the workforce, while men enlisted to fight. The war effort also saw the construction of new military bases and the expansion of existing ones, transforming the Australian landscape. In the aftermath of World War II, Australia emerged as a nation with a strong sense of identity and purpose. The war had tested and shaped the character of the Australian people, forging a spirit of resilience and determination that would serve them well in the years to come. It also marked a significant shift in Australia's foreign policy, strengthening ties with the United States and other countries in the Asia-Pacific region. Following the Second World War, Australia entered a period of significant economic growth and prosperity, often referred to as the terms of trade boom. This was driven by a surge in demand for Australian exports such as wool, wheat, and minerals, thanks to the rebuilding efforts in Europe and Japan. During this time, Australia also experienced a wave of immigration, with millions of migrants arriving from Europe, Asia, and the Middle East. This immigration program was a deliberate effort to boost the population and help rebuild the country following the war. The new arrivals brought with them a wealth of skills and experiences that contributed to Australia's economic growth. They also helped to transform Australia into a truly multicultural society. However, this period was not without its challenges. The 1960s and 70s saw growing social unrest and protests against the Vietnam War and the Whitlam government's dismissal in 1975 led to a period of instability. Nevertheless, Australia continued to develop and grow with the construction of major infrastructure projects such as the Sydney Opera House and the development of new industries such as biotechnology and information technology. Today, Australia is a prosperous and highly developed country with a strong economy and a high standard of living. It is also a multicultural and inclusive society that values diversity and equality. The country's commitment to democracy, human rights, and the rule of law has made it a respected member of the international community. However, Australia also faces significant challenges, including climate change, inequality, and the need to address its history of colonization and its treatment of Indigenous Australians. The country's future will depend on its ability to tackle these issues and to